Hello everybody, I'm Justin.
And I'm Nick.
And we are
Football in the Zone.
So now that week 15 is
almost officially through.
Almost officially, that makes a lot of sense. But let's get straight to tonight's game. The Baltimore Ravens are going up against the Detroit Lions, and who's somebody you're looking at tonight?
I'm looking forward to see all of the running backs. Ray Rice, Bernard Pierce.
The Ray Rice is going up. He hasn't been good all season. One of the biggest fantasy disappointments on the end. He's going up against a real tough matchup in the front four on the Lions.
And I want to see how Reggie Bush is going to fare against the Ravens, who've been tough against running backs, and he's also coming off an injury, remember. But if you're starting him, it is what it is. No other options.
Now let's get to a recap. The Falcons defeated the Redskins, but Kirk Cousins, he had 381 yards with 3 touchdowns. Do you think he's a quarterback too? In a fantasy Super Bowl?
The way he just played, he is a high end too. I think he could sneak in there as a 1 if you've been on the waiver wire all season.
Would you take a shot with him in your championship as
my 1? If I don't have a better option, if I drafted a guy like Matt Ryan as my 1,
and hopefully you made the championship.
Yeah.
But I doubt you made
if you've been on
championship
the waiver wire
if you had somebody like that.
For quarterbacks, then go for Kirk Cousins.
Okay, the Seahawks shut out the Giants. That's enough said. The Vikings defeated the Eagles 48-30, and with Adrian Peterson and Toby Gerhart both injured,
that was a big upset.
And they still managed to have a running back with 3 touchdowns.
Matt Asiata.
Matt Asiata had 3 touchdowns with 51 yards. He had a big day.
Even though he only had 51 yards, the 3 touchdowns make up for it. That's 18 points.
Do you think Adrian Peterson will play next week? Because I don't think they'll rush their best player's injury if this guy could score 3 touchdowns. Do you think they'll...
It's the week before the last week. That means there's only 2 left. And if that guy just scored 3 touchdowns, I think Toby Gerhart's going to play.
It's going
to be a rotation.
If they don't play Adrian Peterson, I don't think he has a lot of value. Because I think you're chasing fantasy points. He didn't have a lot of yards. He only got 3 touchdowns. And if Toby Gerhart comes back, because I don't know if Adrian Peterson will be, but if Toby Gerhart comes back, he will see some red zone targets that Matt Asiata was saying.
Yeah. Are you going to... If you have him and you need a flex option, would you put him as flex if he starts next week?
If he starts next week, I would put him out of flex if you don't have a better option, because if he's starting, that means Adrian Peterson is out.
And Toby Gerhart.
Yes. Next game, the Bears defeated the Browns 38-31, and Jay Cutler, he had a pretty big day. He had 265 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he was a little rusty at first, but he came back. Alshon Jeffrey made a free catch like he always does. And do you think he has a lot of value playing Sunday night next week?
I think he could be a 1. I like him over a lot of other guys this week.
Like who?
I think I would honestly start him over Cam Newton going up against the Saints. The Saints been tough on quarterbacks, and last time Cam Newton played the Saints, he didn't do too well.
The Chiefs defeated the Raiders 56-31, and Jamal Charles is probably one of the possibly MVP on the season, and he had 4 touchdowns, 195 yards, leading the league in receiving yards this week. And Rashad Jennings also had a good day too, 91 yards, 2 touchdowns. And where do you see Rashad Jennings being on the fantasy lineup in the championship?
In the fantasy lineup, I think he's a 2. The way he's been playing, I think he's a 2. A solid 2, but depending on the matchup, he might be a high end 2.
The Packers defeated the Cowboys 37-36, possibly game of the week. That was a great game. And Jordy Nelson, he had a touchdown. He stole the ball from the cornerback. But if Rodgers comes back next week, all these players, their value goes up.
Unless... Well, you don't know how Rodgers is going to be coming off the injury, but
Rodgers. You got to trust him
yeah.
more than you trust these wide receivers, Matt Flynn. And like we said, it also boosts up Benny Lacy's value because you're not going to stack the box as much.
So he's going to get more running room.
The Cardinals defeated the Titans 37-34. Kendall Wright and Ryan Fitzpatrick had a big day. And even though the Cardinals let 34 points go for the Titans, their defense still had a big day. Do you see them being an elite defense versus the Seahawks next week?
I think they couldn't. They're elite defense most of the time, but I think they'll be a little lower. I think you could look at your waiver wire for a better option because Seattle has a great offense.
An upset, 27-16. The Rams defeated the Saints. 30-20. The Steelers defeated the Bengals, and that was a good game. The Steelers Do you trust Big Ben in quarterback 2?
As a quarterback 2 in the fantasy championship, depending on the matchup, yeah, but I think you're kind of chasing fantasy points. Don't expect very big days.
And Le'Veon Bell, he had 57 yards and 1 touchdown. I could see him being a solid running back 2 play for your
depending
fantasy
on the
championship.
matchup, I think he might be able to slip
Well, there's
in
only
as
1 week left.
Yeah, that's true. But depending on his matchup.
Now we're gonna set the timer for 2 minutes. And who do you like this week? Josh Gordon or Antonio Brown?
Josh Gordon, I like Josh Gordon. I think he's been on fire, even though he kind of slowed down last week. I think you still have to put him up there with the elite receivers. I think he's going to continue his reign of doing very good, and I think he'll continue to be in the fantasy championship, elite number 1.
He's got to be a top 5 wide receiver for next season.
Who do you like this next week, Steve Smith or Stevie Johnson?
I gotta go with Stevie Johnson or Steve Smith. I don't like either one of these guys in your fantasy championship. 2 guys who are very inconsistent, and both you can't trust them in your fantasy championship, and I would stay away from both of them. Greg Jennings had a big day. Do you trust him going forward?
I don't trust him much going forward. Especially in the fantasy championship, because he hasn't done much all season. Next week, are you starting Chris Johnson versus Jacksonville or Alfred Morris versus the Cowboys?
That's tough. I like both of them. They both have good matchups, and they've both been pretty good. But I would have to say, if I was able to go with one of them, I would have to go with Alfred Morris, because the Cowboys, they can't stop anybody defensively.
And he also been the more consistent back throughout the season. Chris Johnson been king of inconsistent.
Okay, now quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers coming off an injury is going to boost up Jordy Nelson's value, like we said.
Yeah.
Do you trust Jordy Nelson going forward or Alshon Jeffrey? Who would you rather?
I would rather have Alshon Jeffrey. I think you could trust him
He's
more
going up
at this
against
point.
Philly, and Minnesota tore him up. You saw what Greg Jennings did, and I also agree you got to go with Alshon Jeffrey there.
Jay Cutler versus the Eagles on Sunday Night Football, or Cam Newton versus the Saints.
The thing with Cam Newton is he's been good all year. Like you said, the Saints have a great fantasy defense against quarterbacks. And yes, Jay Cutler has a great matchup, but you got to stick with your studs in the fantasy championship and got to go with Cam Newton. The only way you bench Cam Newton is if maybe you got a guy like Nick Foles or Tony Romo or somebody like that. Otherwise, you got to stick with your stud and play Cam Newton in the fantasy championship.
Frank, would you rather... Who are you starting next week? Ronnie White versus the Niners or Michael Crabtree versus the Falcons?
You got to go with Michael Crabtree. Ronnie White's been too inconsistent. Michael Crabtree came off an injury, and he's been good back-to-back, and the timer is done. But like I said, go with Crabtree. Also, the Falcons can't stop anybody in their secondary. And that will
conclude it.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
Bye.